for Sunday Accompanist. So you may be a beginner organist or pianist. This is a resource for you because we'll be looking at repertoire and what's available on the net that you can easily access. To all our Singapore viewers, happy Phase 2 reopening. I hope you guys finally get the chance to practice on the organ. So moving on, why do we need easy organ music on top of the hymns? So when we decide to play for the service, we all have been gifted a public platform to share our talents and our music. And therefore, I believe it is our duty to lead and inspire worship and to use our talents for the edification of others. Therefore, I need to encourage you guys not to shortchange yourselves and not to settle for the minimum. So we have made a commitment to serve in the music ministry, and therefore we should all strive to give up our best to the Master. And you never know how your music might impact your fellow worshippers. They might be encouraged or moved to join the music ministry, as I have. Playing music that has a connection to the hymns that will be sung helps to reinforce their interpretation, their impression of it. Today, the hymns are all seasonal hymns from Advent, Christmas, Epiphany. So a lot of these hymns, the congregation will only hear once a year. And therefore, their collective memory would be fuzzy at best. So warming them up with a prelude on the same tune helps to wake up their ears and their memory. A lot of these hymns also have a deeper theological message that resonates with the season. So selecting the appropriate music helps to set the mood for the service. You know, a meditative prelude for the Advent season as people reflect on the mystery of the incarnation, or maybe a thought-provoking postlude as they contemplate the true meaning of Christmas. And lastly, to the self-improvement bit here, I believe that we all choose to play music because there is a drive to better ourselves. And easy is very subjective. As we continue learning, what appeared difficult to us months ago may now seem very easy with consistent practice. So with any new piece or genre of music, it will only get easier the more you work on it. So that's the encouraging aspect of it. Some of these pieces are for beginner organists, while others that I have selected are for the more competent pianists. I personally don't enjoy playing pieces that are too easy. There needs to be something challenging that captures your attention without leaving you feeling defeated. So we will build, on success, starting with the easy pieces, and then we'll move up. So moving on to the criteria for selection of today's music. Number one is affordability. Most of us are just Sunday accompanists who have day jobs that aren't remotely related to music. We do it as an outpouring of worship and do not seek payment for services rendered. Therefore, I can completely understand if you do not want to fork out a few $100s for a respectable, handsomely bound edition. And the aim of this session is also to share with you the free online resources that I have found to be very helpful in my journey as a church musician. And I'd like to stress something at this point. Free does not equate to bad. There are a lot of terrible editions out there, albeit done by people with really good intentions, but we have to be very careful from learning from a bad edition because it does affect your playing. Second point, number of page turns. For the beginner organist, it's a lot to figure out when you are seated at the console. You have all these buttons, you have all these keyboards, and you have to play with your feet. And fussing with page turns is probably the last thing I would want to occupy myself with and worry about. So today's selection are all short pieces that fit neatly on the standard music stand. So no worrying about, quick, daunting page turns. And then we move down to the length of the pieces. So some churches allocate maybe 5 minutes before the start of the service, while others necessitate that you play a short postlude because they have back-to-back services. So length of free music is something that we have to be very aware of. The service is not a concert. We cannot be self-indulgent. Also, presenting a piece of correct length means playing it at the prescribed tempo. So no slowing down to accommodate sight reading skills. I mean, imagine if you were reading out a sentence and you had to slow down every single word. It just does not make sense. So music has inherent syntax and grammar, and if you play too slow, it just becomes unintelligible. And moving on to the point of registration, a lot of beginner organists are very fascinated by registration. They see all these buttons and knobs. So the pieces today don't require complex registration. As long as you know what the family of stops are, you can easily select them. Most of them are for one keyboard, sometimes two, because that's what makes organ playing fun, right? Playing on multiple keyboards. But the whole point is that we do not fuss about registration. Also, for people who are working, they might not have time to go practice at church, or they have a conflicting schedule that doesn't allow them to practice at the instrument until the day of service. So having simple registration helps simplify the whole process of preparing for service. Next, we have complexity of music. Naturally, contrapuntal music, it's going to be more difficult than homophonic music, which is homophonic. It's like the hymn texture with all four voices, same rhythm. Bach will be more complex than people that came before him, but that is the extent of it. Our constructs of easy versus difficult is mostly self-imposed. So with diligent practice and applying the right techniques, everything is surmountable, how much time you devote to it. And lastly, it's a very thorny issue, the issue of appropriateness. Every denomination, every church within the parish, every pastor will have a different interpretation of what's appropriate. And often this is only informed by what they have learned in the seminaries. So sometimes you may feel very strongly about a certain piece, you want to play it, but I caution you to respect their authority and also to walk that very fine line of balance. And you also have to stand firm on your conviction, at serving in the music ministry. Inform your conversations with the priest or pastor with well-researched knowledge, and begin each dialogue with the intention to better the body of Christ. So don't go in and insisting that, I want to play this piece, I have to play this piece. So try to work out a middle ground. Now we dive into the music itself. These are the hymnals that I've consulted, common hymnals used in Singapore's context: Methodist hymnal, Presbyterian, Anglican, Lutheran. So all these hymn tunes that I will be suggesting, they can be found in your hymnals. So we open with the Advent season, the beginning of the church calendar. This is Savior of the Nations Come. When Luther separated from the Roman Catholic Church, he didn't have a lot of music with him. So this was an adaptation, as with many of the earlier hymns, from chant. So that we will take a listen to the first example. I've done it in such a way that the first is the easiest, in my opinion, and it gets progressively more difficult or complex. So this is the music. So I selected this piece because it's a choral partita, meaning there are 4 verses. The last that he played was just the hymn itself. So what you have, it's 4 sections that you can pick and choose depending on how much you want to commit or how busy you get. I would suggest starting with the 4th verse first because it's the easiest. Texturally, it's just 2 voices. In his recording, he does play the bass line in the feet, but you can, on digital organs, pull out bass stops and use the bass to grade coupler so you can play the pedal sound on the grade manual. And I would suggest, as the person did, using planum registration, which is the principles 8/4/2 with mixture. Sometimes they add a 16-foot, and sometimes they round off the sound with more 8-foot stops. But that is the default sound of the organ, the default chorus. And then after fourth verse, second verse would be second easiest because it's a melody and accompaniment. So you can choose to solo out the melody as that person did. You know, he played it on flutes, but you can also use what I wrote here as a sesqui ultra registration, meaning you pull out 8, 4, 3, or they call 2 2/3 on some organs. That will produce this very distinctive nasal sound. It can be of a flute, chorus, or principal. So moving on, we have the third verse. Because now the running notes are in the bass and the left hand, it's advisable to use a reed stop. So maybe oboe 8-foot or trumpet 8-foot, because the reeds generally should be louder in the bass register. So even on digital organs, they sometimes voice the bass register of these reeds to be louder. So when you play with the reed register, the left hand will be much more prominent, which is what you want to hear, the figurations. And then lastly, I put verse 1 as the most difficult because it has 4 different parts that move at different times. So this is the most contrapuntal of all the variations. That's why in terms of starting your practice, difficulty will be 4, 2, 3, 1. So now we move on from this Advent hymn to another Advent hymn. This would be Waket auf. We will first listen to Rink, who is a composer from classical period, you know, the bridging period between classical and Baroque. So his style would be slightly different. So this is of a more, you know, overt character than the other. The other, it's usually much more contemplative, quieter. This is more rousing. Again, it's just one page, slow tempo, a lot of simple textures, 2 voices around here, you know, 2 voices around here. And then even when you get 4 voices, it's mostly hymn-like. Everything can be played in the hands. You can choose to, of course, do the bass line in the pedal, but like I said, everything can be done in the hands. You just need to work out some, like this spot here. You just need to take over the A in the right hand. Registration would be a simple 1 sound throughout. Again, the principal chorus of the organ 8/4/3/2 mixture. The previous example is a choral partita. So let me go back to that. We generally change sounds in between the verses, but you can choose not to. But it's more in the practice to change. Let me just take a look at the chat. Now we will listen to the Walter, contemporary of Bach. about this hymn is that it's very long. So if you want to fill up, a longer period of silence, this hymn is perfect for that. And it repeats itself. So, when you learn from here to here, you're actually saving yourself a lot of work by repeating. And this section from bar 14 here to the repeat sign repeats at the end again. So this piece will save you a lot of time, because what you've learned, you can reuse it again. And it's slow-ish, should be doable for pianists grade 6 and above, when they're starting to explore contrapuntal music. There is economy of motives. You see point 3 here, 4 imitation. So what they would do sometimes is to foreshadow the next phrase of the hymn. So this is the first phrase of the hymn, D, F sharp, A. So this is foreshadowed by the first 2 bars. And then the next phrase of the hymn, A, D, C sharp, it's foreshadowed here, it's foreshadowed. So as a listener, you get many appearances of the next phrase of the hymn before the actual phrase comes in. So it helps to solidify it in their memories. When learning this, I would say to just pay attention to the phrasing, because from this until here, this is the end of the first phrase. So it has to sound like one unit, but the end of this phrase also picks up joins with the second phrase. So just to be very aware of that. If not, it could sound very disjointed. So these are 2 popular Advent hymns that you can explore. Next, we move on to Christmas. There's a lot of music for Christmas. In Dulce Jubilo, again, we will hear Zachhaus. No, we will hear the Michael Bach. Again, 2 pages. The melody is plainly and clearly stated in the top voice, so you can hear for yourself, and it's recognizable as the hymn tune. The performer has chosen to do it on 2 different sounds. For the melody, he has chosen to play on a reed stop. So it has of a different sound color. While the left hand, he has chosen to use flutes. You can do, it's doable on 2 manuals, but it's also doable on 1 manual with just 1 sound. Pedal point, beginning, you just plop your feet on G and here on D. This passage where it says pedal, you can play it up the octave and it will be fine. Just play it in the hands. You don't necessarily have to. So it's a little bit of rearranging of the parts. And then similar passage here, just take it up in the hands. So your feet, you only park your feet on G and D. And again, the good thing is that the music repeats itself. So from this point onwards on second page is exactly the same as the opening, but just transposed to the dominant. You know, very attractive melody, happy articulation. So this would be a pleaser for the congregation. Next, we will hear another version of In Dulce Jubilo, and this is by Bach. Yeah, you will notice as the camera pans up and that spinning thing, that stop, that organ stop is called the Zimbelstern, and basically activates a set of bells. So you get a ringing effect. This piece would be technically more challenging because as you can see, there are some passages with pedal. So this might be something for an organist who has played for a few months, but the pedal only comes in when it has a chorale tune. So like I said, this is the first phrase of the hymn, which you play with pedal. And then when it does all the quavers, it's just the hands. And then when it's 4-part hymn texture, again, you play with the pedal. So if you're already learning the hymn, this is not such a departure from it. And the difficulty would be playing it in a fantastical style. So the hymn sections have to be strict, so to speak, with some sense of pulse. And in between, you are free to, with all these rhapsodic quavers, to make them into gestures, rhetorical gestures. This is early Bach. It's virtuosic and harmonically inventive. In fact, people at his church criticized him for this, saying it's too confusing. The things, the interludes that he inserts into the hymn playing distracts from the singing, and they don't know when to start. So this, you get a glimpse of what Bach was doing. Next, we have Christmas hymns, Green Sleeves. These two are selections by modern composers. Don't worry, the tonal style is still very agreeable. It's not strange and out there. The scores can be found on IMS LP, but they don't have a recording yet. So for this, we will skip. Moving on to Silent Night. Having lived in Denmark for 6 years, I can't help but suggest a piece by their most famous composer, Carl Nielsen. So we will hear Nielsen's. This is a Dream of a Silent Night. And this is piano music. So a very charming, quiet piece that can be used for prelude to the service. I know some of you out there are very competent pianists, but don't worry, if you're not so competent, you can actually, from here, this section, before the start of the tempo, cut, and then you jump straight to the adagio, so you can rearrange the piece. And basically, it's this middle section that might be slightly challenging if you don't have strong piano background. So on the organ, the option would be to orchestrate this piece, the outer sections, beginning and the end. You could use very soft strings on the swell division, box closed with the undulating stop, the celeste. So you pull those out together and you get this warm sound. In the middle, you see that it exceeds the range or compass of the organ. So what you can do is probably take a 4-foot flute and play it down the octave. And I would suggest, actually, if you're really adventurous, to do it on 2 different flute sounds. So the right hand of a more singing flute quality and the other softer flute, because this is still accompaniment. And your feet, they are free to operate the swell box. So you can follow the dynamic instructions, you know, when you have crescendo, decrescendo, you play around that with the swell box. And this is a good exercise as well in legato playing and playing around with rubato. So it's a really charming piece, Silent Night. We move on to another Christmas hymn. This might not be so familiar to some of you, but it is quite a popular Christmas carol in Lutheran Germany. And as organ teachers, I know a lot of us like to give this piece, the first Pachelbel piece, as one of the starting exercises in coordination. So you have this. Sorry. We're gonna give it some more. Again, the Zimbelstein. So this piece does use pedals, but the pedal plays the chorale tune and it is very slow. So you can see long note values, and in between each phrase of the hymn, you have rest. So for the beginner organist, you know, it gives you time to look down, you know, maybe readjust your bearing, find where to place your feet next. So it's not a continuous string of pedal notes. You have all these interruptions to help you readjust. For the hands, pretty simple. Most parts, they are going in similar motion, so it's easier for the brain as well. Registration, you can use a light reed, maybe a soft oboe, or a soft principal, and couple it down to the pedal, because that is the hymn tune itself. So we want it to be heard clearly. And above in the hands, you can choose to use flutes, 8/4 or 8/4/2 flutes, or 8/2, a gapped registration. Since the pedal are, you know, it's just slow moving notes, you create a bit of excitement by playing around with articulation in the top two voices. So basically, each of the hands only gets one voice. So it's not, you know, massive 4-part playing. One hand has only one voice. So it's entirely doable if you just practice a little bit. Next, we have the difficult excerpt by Bach. Difficult, of course, being relative, but compared to the Pachelbel, this is more challenging. for the more competent pianist, I know a lot of you like, to take something you're familiar with. So Bach is this common link. So it might be good to start with a little Bach. Like I said, this has to be handled by the more competent pianist because a lot of left-hand dexterity involved, scales flying up and down the keyboard. You have to be very careful with fingering planning because some parts are quite wide. For example, here where I'm highlighting now, the hand span is a bit wide, so you need to share it between the hands. Musically, it's much more complex than the Pachelbel, but still it's doable for the more competent pianist. Registration, like I said, here 8/2, a gapped registration of flutes. So it's a very bright sound that you're looking for. Tempo is brisk because this is angels flying, it's not sluggish angels. So don't play too slow. Next we have another Christmas hymn. This is of course a favorite among organists, the Brahms version. This is for this hymn is common to both Roman Catholics and Protestants. So for the Roman Catholics, they choose the verses that talk more about the Virgin. Even in the hymn title, the rose is symbolic of the Virgin, and for Protestants, they emphasize more on the birth of Christ. And knowing the hymn would really to help you appreciate what Brahms has done so beautifully. So you see the red circles, those are the hymn notes. And it's not a very interesting melody. It's C, 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 D, C, C, and then A. So Brahms has really transformed this, into a very romantic piece. The recording you heard uses different flutes, so you can experiment with the different flute sounds on your instrument. If you have three manuals, you have three different sets of flute sounds you can play around with. If two, then two sets of flute sounds. He also used the tremulant, so you can hear a slight beating in the sound, that slight undulation, which gives the sound a warmer, more pleasing quality to it. Of course, apart from flutes, you can use strings or even softer principles. But whatever it is that you choose to play this on, every manual has to be of the same character. So you cannot have one principle that is so much louder than the flute. So everything has to be of the same character. This piece, if you're attempting it, I would tell you to be very careful of legato, because there are some really big stretches. So for children learning the organ, this piece might have stretches that are too big for their hands. And then if that's the case, you have to plan out fingering very carefully and practice your legato fingering also very carefully. And we move on to one of the best known Christmas hymns. You will hear now two versions. This is Papi. This tune is very popular among French Romantic church musicians. They play this a lot, and on harmonium. So these two versions are harmonium pieces, meaning that it's all played in the hands. I can't find the original harmonium score, so I have to assume that all these changes are just their reinterpretation for the organ. And if we are to follow these indications, so piano would be, your swell division with the swell shades closed. Then you can open it when it crescendos and decrescendos. The large forte section would be on the grand org, meaning the great division of the organ. You can use a reed, or you can use without reeds as well, 16/8/4. And then the swell pedal, use your feet to operate, because you don't play any pedal notes in harmonium pieces. So next is a harmonium piece again by Lefebvre-Villey. This is three movements. You have just heard the introduction and the andante. Similar to the previous piece, it's mostly hymn-like texture, so should not be too difficult if you're already learning the hymn. The thing you have to pay attention when transferring harmonium music to the organ is the registration, because sometimes the texture, the harmony gets inverted because of the registration used on a harmonium. But thankfully, this version is very simple registration. Like I said, you see these numbers here. They indicate the sound that you normally would select on a harmonium. So 1 would tell you it's 8 foot. Number 2 tells you it's a 16 foot. And then this portion here where you have a strike dash through number 2, that will be to take away the 16 foot. And the G at this forte here, that tells you to pull up 16, 8, and 4. So the harmonium is also much more expressive than the organ. So when you're transferring harmonium music to the organ, of course you can freely orchestrate, but if you want a more faithful reading of the music, play around with the swell shades, since your feet, they are free, and also to choose sound that mimic the warm tones of the harmonium. The last movement's allegretto. It's for the more competent pianists, because you have quite a fast right hand bits. But these two, they make for a really nice introduction prelude to the service as well. Christmas Day service. Then we move on to Epiphany, the last selection of music. So you have heard pieces from Baroque to Romantic to Modern. We will hear the Bach first. Johann Christoph Bach. My suggestion to the beginner organist, these moving pedal parts, these two bars with the crotchets, you can play them in the left hand, and then the right hand just play 2 notes. But the feet, I would suggest you put 1 foot on A, 1 foot on D for the pedal points. And then of course you go back again to A. But apart from that, everything else can be played comfortably in the hands. And it's simple, the rhythm is straightforward, the melody is straightforward, so it's an accessible piece for beginner organists. Now we'll hear another version that's quite different from a modern composer, Dissler. Modern but still tuneful. the piece actually has a reharmonization of the hymn after this, but you can skip that because the music just ends there as well. So this is a nice modern selection. If you do not like to play Baroque music, you don't like to play romantic music, yeah, this is something for you. Then we have come to the end of our session. So this is just a sampling of pieces. These are more Noels and character pieces, Christmas pieces that you can explore. These do not have a direct relation with the hymn because these are not hymn-based, but they are in the spirit of Christmas and Noel tunes. And for more resources, you can look to these scores and publishers. All the music that I've listed today, you can do a quick internet search and they are there online, free for download. And that's it. This is the end of the session. I hope you found something useful for your next service as we prepare for the new liturgical year. And I will take all questions in the chat.
Thank you. For participants, if you have any questions that you want to ask by audio, please raise your hand. Caroline has a question. I'm going to put it on audio. Caroline, please ask your question. Thank you. Okay, maybe not, then we'll go to chat if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, all the material can be found on the internet. So when we send you the PDF, you can just do a quick search and all the music should be there. It's a mix of soft pieces, loud pieces, but most importantly, all of them are easy to some extent and they're short. So you can easily master